Hey, everyone. I don't even know where to start, but I feel like I need to get this off my chest before I lose my mind. My name's Grant, I'm 32 years old, and up until a few weeks ago, I thought I had the perfect life. I've been married to Dina for a decade. 10 years of love, partnership, and what I thought was unwavering trust. We've been through thick and thin together, celebrated anniversaries, supported each other's dreams, and made a home. I never thought I'd be the guy writing one of these posts, but here I am. Things started to change a few months back, and honestly, I didn't think much of it at first. Life gets busy, right? Work stress, responsibilities, all that stuff. But Dina, she started acting differently. The kind of different that nags at you but you can't quite put your finger on. She was always on her phone. Not just a little more than usual, but all the time. Texting, laughing at things I wasn't in on, flipping the screen over when I walked into the room. When I'd ask her who she was chatting with, she'd wave me off with some excuse. It's work, it's the group chat with my friends, or nothing important. At first, I believed her. Why wouldn't I? But her tone felt dismissive, like she wanted to end the conversation before it started. And then there was her attitude toward me. Dina was always affectionate, the kind of person who'd give me a hug just because or randomly tell me she loved me out of the blue. That started to fade. She'd pull away when I tried to cuddle her on the couch or claim she was too tired. Even when we talked, it felt off. Like she was there, but her mind was somewhere else. I convinced myself it was just a rough patch. People go through phases, right? I figured maybe she was stressed, so I tried stepping up more. I cooked dinners, planned surprise date nights, left her little notes on the fridge like I used to when we were first married. Nothing worked. The more effort I put in, the colder she seemed to get. It was like trying to hug a shadow. It was there, but not really. That's when doubt crept in. Was she unhappy with me? Did I do something to push her away? Or was it someone else? I didn't want to believe it. Dina and I built this life together, and I trusted her. But as the weeks went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. The moment that confirmed my worst fears came one evening after dinner. Dina left her phone on the counter while she went to shower. It was just sitting there, lighting up every few seconds with notifications. I could hear the water running upstairs, and it felt like time slowed down. My heart was racing as I stared at that phone, debating with myself. I'm not a snooper. I never have been. I've always believed in respecting each other's privacy. But that gut feeling I had, it was screaming at me not to ignore this. I picked it up, my hands trembling. At first, everything looked normal. Texts, emails, the usual apps. Then I noticed something strange in the app drawer. A purple icon I'd never seen before. It was called Badoo. At first, I didn't even know what it was, but a quick search confirmed it, a dating app. My stomach dropped. My world tilted on its axis. I felt like an idiot for not realizing sooner. I couldn't ignore it. My hands were shaking as I tapped the app icon, bracing myself for what I might find. When the screen loaded, there it was, her profile. Her name, her picture, all made to look like she was single. She'd even added a playful bio about loving spontaneous adventures. It was her, no question about it. But the worst part was the messages. There weren't just one or two conversations. She was chatting with over 20 men. Some of the chats were casual, but others were straight up flirty or explicit. I read a few, enough to see her joking, laughing, and making plans with these guys like it was no big deal. It felt like someone had pulled the floor out from under me. The whole time I'd been trying to figure out what was wrong, beating myself up, she'd been doing this. I felt sick. My chest was tight, and my head was spinning, but I knew I couldn't break down yet. I needed proof, something she couldn't deny. Quickly, I grabbed my phone and took pictures of everything. Her profile, her messages, all the usernames. Every tap on her screen felt like a betrayal cutting deeper. When I was done, I closed the app, cleared the recent history, and put her phone back exactly as I found it. The sound of the water upstairs stopped. My stomach churned as I sat back down, trying to look normal. When she came downstairs, smiling at me, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. She had no idea I'd seen everything, but I wasn't going to confront her yet. I needed a plan, something that would make her face the full weight of what she'd done. After what I saw, I couldn't look at Dina the same way. Every smile, every casual "how was your day" felt fake, like she was performing some role instead of being my wife. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed to stay calm and think this through. If I rushed in with accusations, she'd find a way to twist it, make me doubt myself, or worse, gaslight me into thinking I was the problem. The next few days were brutal. Every time I saw her pick up her phone, I wondered which one of those men she was texting. Was she laughing at their jokes? Planning when to meet up? I hated how powerless I felt, but I kept reminding myself I had the upper hand now. I had the proof, and I wasn't going to waste it. That's when the idea came to me. If Dina was out there pretending to be someone she wasn't, why couldn't I? So, I made a fake profile. I used a random picture of a guy I found online. A typical handsome stranger type. I created a persona that I knew would catch her attention. Confident, adventurous, flirty. Someone completely different from me. It didn't take long. Within a day of setting up the account, Dina matched with me. My heart sank seeing her name pop up, but I swallowed the anger and sent her a message, keeping it light and charming. I figured if I could get her to bite, I'd learn just how far she was willing to go. Sure enough, she replied almost immediately. Her messages were playful, flirty, and way too comfortable for a woman who was supposed to be married. As the conversation continued, I realized she wasn't just looking for attention. She was actively trying to make something happen. The more she opened up, the more determined I became. I needed to see how far this would go. So, I suggested meeting up. I thought she might hesitate, make excuses, but she didn't. She agreed without a second thought, even suggesting a cafe where she liked to hang out. That was it. I had her. Now all I had to do was wait for the day of the meetup, where everything would finally come crashing down. When Dina agreed to meet me at the cafe, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. She didn't hesitate, didn't ask questions, didn't even seem nervous. She was so casual about it, like meeting random men while married was just normal. I guess for her, maybe it was. The meetup was set for Saturday afternoon. She told me she'd be running errands, which explained why she didn't bother making up an elaborate excuse. It was infuriating to hear her lie so easily, like it was second nature. But I played dumb and acted like everything was fine, even though inside I felt like I was about to explode. Saturday came faster than I expected. She spent the morning getting ready, putting extra effort into her appearance. More than she usually did for a normal day out. Watching her in the mirror, smiling at herself, made my stomach churn. She wasn't getting ready for me, for us. She was doing it for some fantasy she'd built with the man she thought she was meeting. When she finally left, I waited for a few minutes before grabbing my keys and heading out. I parked far enough from the cafe so she wouldn't see me, but close enough to keep an eye on her when she arrived. Sure enough, I saw her walk in, dressed to impress and carrying that air of confidence she used to save for our date nights. I stayed in the car, watching her from a distance as she found a table and started scrolling on her phone. She looked so calm, so at ease, like she wasn't betraying the person who loved her most. I waited a little longer, letting her sit there and anticipate her update. It gave me time to steady my nerves and make sure I didn't lose my temper. Finally, it was time. I stepped out of the car, walked across the parking lot, and headed straight for the cafe door. My heart was pounding, but I wasn't scared. I was ready to confront her, to make her face the truth she'd been trying to hide. As I pushed open the door and saw her sitting there, clueless about what was coming, I knew this was the moment our marriage would truly end. Walking into that cafe felt surreal, like I was stepping into some twisted alternate reality. Dina sat there, sipping her coffee, casually scrolling through her phone without a care in the world. She had no idea the man walking toward her wasn't the handsome stranger she'd been chatting with, but her husband, the man she'd been lying to all along. I stopped a few feet from her table. For a moment, I just stood there, taking it all in. The woman I had shared my life with, my dreams with, was sitting there, waiting to meet a man who didn't exist. She finally looked up and froze, her expression shifting from confusion to panic as she realized it was me. Her face said it all. She didn't need to speak for me to know what was going through her mind. She'd been caught. She tried to play it cool, but her hands fidgeted, her cheeks flushed, and she avoided making eye contact. The confident woman who had walked into the cafe moments earlier was suddenly reduced to someone scrambling for an excuse. I sat down across from her, placing my phone on the table with the screen facing up. I didn't need to say anything. I just opened the photo album where I'd saved all the screenshots, the profile, the conversations, the plans to meet. I let her look at it, one image after another, until she couldn't deny it anymore. She stammered something about how it wasn't what it looked like, that she'd only been chatting for fun, that she never planned on actually meeting anyone. But her words rang hollow. We both knew the truth, and the evidence I'd gathered left no room for her to weasel out of it. I told her it was over. There was nothing left to discuss, no way to fix what she'd broken. She tried to plead, her voice shaking as she insisted she didn't mean for things to get this far. But her excuses only made it worse. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done, she was sorry she got caught. Standing up, I left her there, stunned and humiliated. I didn't care what she did next. As far as I was concerned, she had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. It was time for me to take back control of my life and start the process of moving on. Leaving the cafe, I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and relief. I had been holding on to so much hurt and suspicion, and now it was all out in the open. Dina couldn't deny it anymore, and I didn't need to carry the weight of wondering. But as I sat in my car, I realized this was just the beginning. Ending a marriage, ending a life you've built with someone, doesn't happen in one moment, no matter how clear the betrayal is. When I got home, the house felt different, like a place I didn't belong anymore. It wasn't a home, it was just a shell of what it used to be. Memories of the life Dina and I had built together surrounded me, but they felt fake now, tainted by what I discovered. I knew I couldn't stay in limbo, though. I needed to act quickly. So, I went straight to my desk and started gathering the paperwork for the divorce. I'd never thought I'd be one of those people who needed to know how to legally untangle their life from someone else's, but here I was. It was painful, but it was necessary. After printing the initial forms, I called a locksmith to change the locks. I wasn't going to wait for her to come home and try to talk her way out of this. She could pack her things, but she wasn't staying under my roof anymore. It was my turn to set the boundaries. As I worked through the practical steps, a strange kind of clarity came over me. I realized how much I had been bending over backward for Dina, trying to fix something she had no interest in fixing. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what she wanted or how to keep her happy. I was thinking about myself, what I needed to feel safe and respected again. When the locksmith arrived, I stood in the doorway, watching as the old locks were replaced. It felt symbolic, like I was shutting the door on the version of my life that included Dina. She'd made her choices, and now I was making mine. By the time Dina called, I was ready. I told her she could come by tomorrow to collect her things, but I wasn't interested in talking or hearing any more excuses. I was done. The next day, Dina came to collect her things. I watched her pull into the driveway from the living room window. It was strange seeing her car there, knowing she wasn't coming home, at least not in the way she used to. She got out slowly, hesitating before heading to the door. For a moment, it looked like she might turn back, but then she straightened up and knocked. I opened the door and stepped aside, saying nothing. She didn't try to hug me or even make eye contact, which was just as well. I wasn't interested in any forced gestures of remorse. Her face looked tired and puffy, her usual confidence replaced by a nervous energy that made her movements awkward. Most of her things were already packed and sitting in the living room. I'd spent the night before going through the house, boxing up anything that belonged to her. Clothes, books, random odds and ends. I didn't leave much for her to do. I thought it would make things easier for both of us, but instead, she wandered from room to room, running her fingers over furniture and glancing at the walls like she was trying to hold on to something. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and shaky. She said she didn't mean for things to get this far, that she never thought she'd actually hurt me this way. She admitted she'd made mistakes, but she claimed it wasn't about me, it was about her feeling lost. That word, lost, made me want to laugh bitterly. She wasn't lost when she was chatting with 20 men. She wasn't lost when she walked into that cafe. But I stayed quiet. I wasn't going to waste my breath defending myself or rehashing what we both knew. She kept talking though. She said she never thought I'd find out, which honestly, hit me harder than I expected. It was like she wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry for being caught. When I didn't respond, she tried another approach, saying that this didn't have to be the end, that we could work on things, rebuild trust, and come out stronger. I shook my head. I told her there was no trust left to rebuild. I'd spent years giving her my love, my loyalty, and my time, and she threw it all away for what? A cheap thrill? A distraction? There was no coming back from that. Her tears started then, slow at first, but soon she was sobbing. She asked if I'd ever be able to forgive her. I didn't answer. Forgiveness wasn't even on my mind. It felt so far away, like another language I didn't understand anymore. When she was done packing, she stood by the door with her suitcases, looking at me like she wanted me to say something, anything, to stop her. I didn't. I just stood there, arms crossed, watching as she slowly opened the door and stepped outside. Before she left, I told her I'd already filed for divorce and that she'd be hearing from my lawyer soon. Her face crumpled, and she nodded. She didn't try to argue or make any more excuses. She just loaded her things into her car and drove away. When the sound of her car disappeared down the street, I locked the door and sat in the living room, staring at the empty space where her things used to be. The house felt quieter than it ever had, but the silence wasn't comforting. It was heavy, filled with the echoes of what had been. For the first time in days, I felt something other than anger or sadness. I felt relief. The worst part was over. Dina was gone, and I didn't have to wonder anymore. It wasn't the kind of ending I'd ever wanted, but at least it was an ending. After Dina left, the reality of what had happened started to settle in. I thought I'd feel more broken, maybe even hopeless, but honestly, the overwhelming emotion was relief. For weeks, I'd been living in this fog of doubt and betrayal, trying to piece together the truth. Now, it was all out in the open, and there was no more guessing, no more pretending. Dina was gone, and I was finally free to deal with this on my terms. But before I could fully move on, there was one more thing I needed to do. Dina's betrayal wasn't just about what she'd done to me, it was about the lies she'd told to keep up appearances. I wasn't going to let her rewrite the story or play the victim when she was the one who tore everything apart. So, I made a call to her mom. Her parents and I had always been close. They were good people, and over the years, I'd come to think of them as family. I knew they'd want to know what was going on, and I wasn't about to let Dina twist the narrative to make herself look innocent. It wasn't about revenge. It was about being honest. Her mom answered on the second ring, cheerful at first, but I could hear the shift in her tone when I told her I needed to talk. I laid it all out for her, sparing no details. The texting, the fake profile, the cafe meetup. I didn't leave anything out. There was a long silence on the other end of the line when I finished, and then I heard her sigh deeply. She told me she was sorry, that she couldn't believe Dina would do something like this. She said she and her husband had always thought Dina and I had the perfect marriage and that they were blindsided by what I'd just told her. I believed her. Dina had everyone fooled, not just me. Her mom asked if there was any chance we could work things out, and I told her the truth. There wasn't. Dina had burned the bridge, and I wasn't interested in rebuilding it. Her mom didn't argue. She just said she understood and promised to talk to Dina herself. After hanging up, I felt a weight lift. It wasn't about dragging Dina through the mud, it was about making sure the people closest to us knew the truth. If Dina wanted to lie her way through the fallout, that was her choice, but at least now her parents knew the full story. That night, I sat alone in the house, the silence settling in around me. It was strange, being in a space that used to feel so full and now felt so empty. But even in that emptiness, there was a sense of possibility, like I was finally starting to reclaim my life. Dina was gone, the lies were exposed, and I was one step closer to moving on. The next day, I decided it was time to take back the house. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of Dina, her favorite throw blanket draped over the couch, the perfume bottle on the bathroom counter, the photo of us from our last anniversary still sitting on the mantel. Each one felt like a little stab to the chest. If I was going to move forward, those things had to go. I started small, boxing up her clothes from the closet. It was strange, pulling out the dresses I used to compliment her on, the ones she'd worn on date nights or to family gatherings. Each piece felt like a memory, but instead of nostalgia, I felt resentment. I kept telling myself it was just stuff, meaningless in the grand scheme of things, but it still hurt more than I expected. By the time I got to the bathroom, my anger started to creep in. All the expensive skincare products she'd convinced me to buy, the special hairbrush she swore was worth the extra money, I tossed them into a box without a second thought. The bathroom had always been her sanctuary, filled with little luxuries, but now it just felt like a monument to her selfishness. The hardest part came when I reached the living room. That's where all our shared memories lived, the wedding album, the framed photos from vacations, the souvenirs we'd picked out together. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the shelf where it all sat. I thought about throwing everything into a garbage bag and being done with it, but something stopped me. Instead, I packed the sentimental things carefully into a separate box. Not for her, but for me. As much as I hated her for what she'd done, those moments had been real at the time. I wasn't ready to completely erase them, even if they felt hollow now. The box went straight into the garage, out of sight but not destroyed. Maybe one day I'd figure out what to do with it. When I was done, I loaded everything else, her clothes, her personal items, her little decorations, into my car and drove it to a nearby storage unit I'd rented. I texted Dina the address and told her she had 30 days to pick it up or I'd donate it. I didn't wait for a response. That evening, I sat in my freshly decluttered living room, surrounded by the emptiness I'd created. It was quiet, almost too quiet, but there was a strange peace in it. The house no longer felt like ours, it felt like mine. I poured myself a drink and sat on the couch, staring at the blank spots on the walls where her pictures used to hang. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally breathe. Dina had taken enough from me, but this house? This was mine now, and I was going to make it my own again. A few weeks passed after Dina left. At first, it felt like I was in some kind of waiting game. I wasn't sure what to expect next, whether she'd try to come back, apologize, or drag this thing out with her lawyer. But as time went on, I began to realize she wasn't coming back. She'd made her choice, and she'd already moved on, pretending like nothing had happened. I didn't feel the need to chase her down or waste my energy wondering what she was doing. The divorce papers came through soon after I filed, and it hit me that this was it. There was no going back. We were officially closing the chapter on our marriage, on the life I thought we were building together. The lawyer I'd hired was good. She'd made sure I had everything in order. Custody arrangements, since we didn't have kids, that wasn't complicated. Financial stuff, the house. I wasn't after revenge. I wasn't looking to drain her bank account or take more than I deserved. I just wanted to walk away with what was mine and leave the rest behind. The day the papers were finalized, I knew Dina would be pissed. She'd been dragging her feet, hoping I'd cave and give her a better deal, or maybe expecting me to soften up. But I wasn't going to play her game. When I got the final draft of the divorce settlement, I didn't waste time. I sent it straight to her, along with a note that we were done. There were no more negotiations. No more talking. I made sure everything was clear, and I made it clear that I wasn't interested in rehashing the past. A few hours later, I got a call from her lawyer. She was trying to get me to back off on a few things, mostly financial stuff. She claimed she didn't have the means to support herself, but that felt like a line of crap to me. Dina had always been able to take care of herself. She didn't need me, not in the way she pretended. I didn't even bother arguing. I told her lawyer to send it all back as is, and that we'd be moving forward. That was it. No more discussions. I hung up feeling a bit of satisfaction. It was over. The following weeks were quiet. I started to adjust to the new normal. I hadn't realized how much emotional energy I'd been expending just trying to keep things together when she was still in my life. Now that she was gone, the weight had lifted, and I was able to focus on things I'd neglected: work, personal projects, and even spending time with friends who'd stayed loyal. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward. Dina was just a chapter now, a painful one, but one that was finally closed. A few months after the divorce was finalized, I thought I was finally starting to move on. I'd spent the time cleaning up my life, catching up with old friends, getting back into hobbies I'd put on the back burner, and just rediscovering who I was outside of a relationship. For the first time in years, I felt like I was actually living for myself, not for someone else. Then, the phone call came. It was late on a Wednesday night, right as I was getting into bed. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I didn't recognize the number, but something made me pick it up. Maybe it was the fact that it was a local area code, or maybe I was just used to Dina's number being the one that would call with some kind of crisis. I answered, but before I could say anything, I heard her voice. Dina. My stomach dropped. It had been a while since I'd heard from her, and it took me a second to process the tone in her voice. She sounded broken. She told me she had messed up. She said she was sorry, that she hadn't realized what she had until it was gone. That she missed me. The words came tumbling out, as if she was trying to fix something that could never be fixed. She said she was alone now and regretted the way things ended between us. I wasn't sure how to respond at first. Part of me wanted to be angry. Part of me wanted to ask her how she could just throw everything away and then come crawling back when it suited her. But most of all, I felt nothing. I'd spent so much time in the aftermath of our marriage trying to make sense of it all, looking for answers, trying to understand where I went wrong. But now, hearing her voice again, I realized I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her excuses or her regrets. It was too little, too late. I told her I was fine, that I was moving on, and that I had nothing left to say to her. I told her to stop calling me, that it was over for good, and there was no point in revisiting the past. She tried to argue, but I just hung up. The moment I ended the call, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The final tie was cut. Dina wasn't coming back into my life, and I wasn't letting her back in, no matter how many times she tried to apologize. I had nothing left to say to her. She had had her chance, and I was done. It had been several months since I had made the phone calls, told Dina's family the truth, and completely let go of her. The pain had softened, and the bitterness had slowly faded, but it wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a process. Every day, I let go of a little bit more of what I had once believed to be my life. Dina's family had eventually reached out, not to mend things with me, but more as a formality. They had tried to reconcile their own feelings with the situation. Her mom had apologized again, saying she was sorry for how everything went down, but I knew nothing would ever be the same. Her dad? He said a few words of regret, but it was clear that Dina was still his daughter. As much as they cared about me, they were still bound to her. I understood that, and I didn't hold it against them. I didn't reach out after that. I let them process things in their own way. They'd done what they could, but the truth was, Dina's betrayal had left an irreversible crack in all of it. And I didn't need to try to fix it. I didn't need them to pick sides. I didn't need to be a part of their family anymore. I had my own life to rebuild, and that's exactly what I did. It was a slow and painful process, but it was mine to own. I spent the next few months focusing on myself, getting back into old hobbies I had neglected, reconnecting with friends I had distanced myself from during the marriage, and just focusing on moving forward. I started therapy, something I'd never considered before, and it helped me process the anger and the sadness. I took my time letting go of the past. I spent my weekends away from the old neighborhood, went on trips, and eventually met some new people. No, I wasn't ready for anything serious, but the idea of opening myself up again wasn't as terrifying as it had once been. One day, I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about Dina in days. Her name didn't sting anymore. The constant, nagging ache had finally faded. I wasn't holding on to anything anymore. No false hope, no anger, no what-ifs. I had let it go, truly. I thought back to the phone calls, the conversations with her family, the emotional weight of having to be the one to tell the truth. There was a part of me that felt like I had somehow been stripped of all that I had once known. But there was also a part of me that felt free. I wasn't her husband anymore. I wasn't tied to her family, to the life we had built. It wasn't easy to sever those ties, but I had done it. And in the process, I found something new. Peace. Dina was a part of my past, a chapter in my life that I had closed. And as much as I had loved her at one point, I wasn't going to waste another day living in the shadows of what could have been. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was just moving on. And that was the most freeing thing I could have ever done. A few months after everything went down, after the dust had settled and I'd gotten a little more distance from the situation, I realized there was one final thing I needed to do. Dina's family had been left hanging, and I couldn't just let that go. Despite everything that had happened, they deserved to hear it from me one last time. not as a way to get validation, but to let them know that I was okay and that I wasn't holding on to the past anymore. They needed to hear me say it, to hear me officially let Dina go, once and for all. I had already given them the basic details about the affair, the lies, and how everything had unfolded. But there was still that lingering sense that maybe, just maybe, they thought there was more I could have done to salvage the relationship. Maybe they thought I was still angry, that I hadn't fully moved on, that I was still caught up in the hurt. But I wasn't. Not anymore. So, I made the call. I dialed Dina's mom's number again. It had been a few months since the last time I spoke to her. She answered after the second ring, this time with a more measured, quiet voice. She had been respectful, but I could tell she was still grieving the loss of what she thought our marriage was. She didn't ask me how I was doing or offer any pleasantries. She just said hello as though she already knew why I was calling. I took a breath, gathered my thoughts, and told her the truth again. But this time it was different. I told her that I wasn't angry anymore, that I had forgiven Dina, in my own way, but I was finally ready to close that chapter. I explained that I had moved on, that the pain was starting to fade, and that I wasn't holding on to the hope of reconciliation anymore. I said that Dina had made her choices, and I had made mine, and now I was focused on my own healing, my own future. Her mom listened, silently, but I could feel the weight lifting as I spoke. I told her I didn't want her to worry about me anymore, that I was doing better than I had been in months. I wasn't looking for any kind of redemption or sympathy from her, just for her to know that I wasn't stuck in the past. After a long pause, Dina's mom said, I appreciate you telling me that. I'm sorry for what happened. She didn't say much else, and I didn't push her for more. We said our goodbyes, and that was it. Later that day, I decided to call Dina's dad. I hadn't spoken to him in over 2 months, and I wasn't sure what to expect. Would he still be angry? Would he be distant? When I dialed his number, I felt the familiar knot in my stomach, but I knew it had to be done. I had to completely let go of the life I had with Dina, and that meant having this last conversation with her family. He answered on the first ring, his voice gruff and tired, but somehow calm. I started by thanking him for all the years he'd treated me like family. I told him that I wasn't holding on to any resentment anymore. I knew he loved his daughter, and I wasn't looking to place any blame on him or her mom. What happened was between Dina and me, and at this point, there was nothing left to fix. I'm good, I said. I'm moving on. I just wanted you to know that I've let Dina go. And I'm okay. I'm rebuilding my life, and I'm not going to let this define me anymore. There was a long silence before he spoke. I don't know what to say, Grant, he said, his voice thick. I didn't see this coming. But I'm glad you're okay. I'm glad you're moving on. That was all I needed to hear. There were no more apologies or explanations. It was the finality of it that I needed, both for myself and for them. I hung up the phone with a sense of peace. Not a rushed or forced kind of peace, but a real, grounded kind of peace. I had done what I needed to do. I had said my piece, given them the truth, and let Dina go. I wasn't holding on to any anger or regret, or hope that she would come back and apologize. She had made her choices, and now I was making mine. I hadn't heard from Dina since the divorce, and at this point, I wasn't expecting anything. I had already gone through the pain of betrayal, and I wasn't about to let it drag me down any further. Talking to her family had been hard, but I knew it was the last step in fully closing that chapter. Looking back, I realized that the hardest part of all of this wasn't necessarily losing Dina. It was losing the version of the life I thought we had built. The betrayal wasn't just about her affair. It was about the disillusionment, the trust that had shattered. But once I had made the phone calls, once I had truly let go, I felt like a weight had been lifted from my chest. I had no more strings tying me to the past, no more emotional anchors pulling me under. Dina had made her choices, and I had made mine. It was time to start living for myself again. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't obsessed with what had happened or what could have been. I had learned a painful lesson, but I had grown from it. And now, I was ready to move forward. After the divorce was final, I took a long, hard look at the life I had left behind and the one I wanted to build moving forward. The apartment I rented was small, but it felt like a fresh start. For the first time in years, I wasn't living in the shadow of someone else's decisions. The weight of Dina's betrayal was starting to feel lighter, and I realized that I needed to take some steps to move beyond it. Truly move beyond it. The first thing I decided to do was something I'd always wanted to do but never had the chance to before. I had always loved animals, and Dina had never been a fan of getting a dog. We'd talked about it a few times, but there was always some reason why it didn't happen. I remember how excited I would get, imagining a dog running around the backyard or laying by the couch on a lazy Sunday. But that was a dream I had to put aside, like so many others, when things started to fall apart. Now, though, it felt like the right time to make it a reality. I knew I was ready for the responsibility, and I wanted the company. I'd always preferred the loyalty and love of a dog over the complexities of human relationships. I wasn't looking for a replacement, but I thought it would be good for me to have something positive to focus on. Something to remind me that love didn't always have to come with strings attached. I went to the local shelter one Saturday afternoon. The building was quieter than I expected. No barking, no chaos, just rows of cages with dogs looking up at me with hopeful eyes. I spent about an hour walking around, trying to decide which one felt like the right fit. Some of the dogs were energetic, others calm and reserved. I took my time. There was one that stood out to me, a mixed breed with shaggy brown fur and an expression that seemed both cautious and curious at the same time. She was a medium-sized dog, maybe a couple of years old. I could tell she had a history, but I also saw potential in her. She had this quiet confidence, like she knew exactly what she needed but wasn't rushing to find it. I decided right then that I was going to adopt her. Her name was Hazel. They told me she had been found on the street, abandoned and scared. She wasn't a puppy, but she was still young enough to adapt quickly. I couldn't help but feel a connection to her. Maybe it was the way we both seemed to have been through some rough patches, but we were ready for a new start. I took her home that afternoon. She was a little skittish at first, unsure of her new surroundings. But as the days went on, she began to settle in. It didn't take long for us to fall into a routine. She would curl up on the couch next to me when I worked or rest her head on my feet when I watched TV. We'd take long walks around the neighborhood in the evenings, and it felt like the weight of everything that had happened with Dina began to lift just a little more with every step. It was comforting to know I wasn't alone, even when the silence of the apartment got overwhelming. Around the same time I adopted Hazel, I also decided to take the plunge and start working from home. I'd been wanting to do it for years. The thought of having more control over my time, of being able to set my own schedule and avoid the daily grind, was a dream I'd held onto for a long time. But with the marriage, it had always felt like something I couldn't make happen. Now, though, it felt like the right time. I had nothing to lose and everything to gain. I had a few skills in digital marketing and content writing, so I started looking for remote freelance opportunities. It wasn't easy at first, there was a lot of competition, and the work didn't come flooding in immediately, but I was persistent. I spent hours each day researching job boards, applying for gigs, and improving my portfolio. The work wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. And over time, I started to build a reputation and a client base. After about a month, I had a steady stream of projects coming in. I was working from home full-time, managing my own schedule, and spending time with Hazel every day. There were days when it was hard, when the loneliness crept in or the work piled up, but for the most part, it felt right. I felt more in control of my life than I had in years. I realized I had underestimated how much I needed the flexibility to work on my own terms. I had underestimated how much I needed a fresh start, to break free from the mold of what I thought my life was supposed to be. As the months passed, I settled into a new rhythm. Hazel and I were a team. She kept me company during long workdays, and I rewarded her with treats and belly rubs. My work was improving, my confidence was growing, and I felt a sense of peace that had been missing for a long time. It wasn't the life I had imagined all those years ago, but it was my life now. It was simple, it was honest, and it was mine. I had learned the hard way that you can't plan everything out, and sometimes, life will throw you curveballs. But it's how you pick yourself back up that matters. And now I was building something new. Slowly but surely. I had Hazel, I had my work, and I had a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I was finally free. A year had passed since I adopted Hazel, and what a difference that year had made. I didn't recognize the person I was when I first walked away from my marriage to Dina. Back then, I was angry, lost, unsure of where I fit into the world. I was hurt, but I was also determined to rebuild my life, step by step. The past year had been full of challenges, but looking back, I could see how every decision, every moment of struggle, had brought me closer to who I was now. Someone who was finally content with the life I had created for myself. The work-from-home job had really taken off. My skills in digital marketing and content writing had paid off more than I could have imagined. I started landing bigger contracts, working with clients who valued my expertise. What started as a few small freelance projects quickly snowballed into a steady income stream. I was no longer scraping by, but actually building a foundation for the future. I had the freedom to choose the projects that excited me, and my reputation in the industry started to grow. The remote work lifestyle allowed me to take on projects from all over the world, and I found myself learning new things every day. I felt like I was on the cusp of something bigger, but I didn't want to get too ahead of myself. One day, I got an email from a startup company looking to hire a full-time marketing consultant. The pay was significantly higher than anything I'd been earning before, and they wanted someone to help shape their brand's digital presence. It felt like a golden opportunity, but at the same time, it wasn't what I had originally envisioned. I had enjoyed the flexibility of freelance work, the freedom to make my own hours, and the ability to work at my own pace. I had spent so many years tied to a 9-to-5 grind, I wasn't sure I wanted to go back to that life. But the offer was tempting. After much thought, I took the plunge. I signed on with them and started working as a full-time consultant. In hindsight, it was the best decision I could have made. The position allowed me to work from home still, and the pay gave me a sense of financial security I hadn't known in years. More importantly, it gave me the freedom to focus on what I wanted in life. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. My bills were paid, my savings account was growing, and I had the financial freedom to take care of myself in ways I hadn't even dreamed of when I was married to Dina. But it wasn't just about the money. As I looked back at the months of hard work and late nights, I realized that the greatest wealth I had gained wasn't just financial. It was the personal growth, the lessons learned, and the happiness that came from doing something I loved every single day. I was building something for myself, not for anyone else. I was in charge of my destiny, and that sense of control was priceless. As the months went by, I found myself getting more comfortable in my own skin. I wasn't consumed by thoughts of Dina anymore, or the past. Sure, there were still moments of sadness or loneliness, but I didn't let those moments define me. I had learned to embrace the uncertainty and trust that things would work out the way they were supposed to. The universe had a way of throwing curveballs, but it also had a way of rewarding those who kept moving forward, who kept working through the mess of life. And then, one day, it hit me. I was happy. No, I wasn't rich in the traditional sense, but I was wealthy in ways that mattered more. I had time, freedom, and the satisfaction of knowing I had turned my life around. I had a job that gave me purpose and a dog who loved me unconditionally. My life was simple, but it was full. I spent my weekends traveling, exploring new places, or just hanging out with Hazel in the park. I met new people along the way, and slowly, I began to realize that happiness wasn't about having everything figured out. It was about finding peace in the process, in the journey. I didn't have a perfect life, and I didn't have everything I once thought I wanted. But I had everything I needed. I had the courage to let go of the past, to build a future that was mine. The wealth I found was in my own growth, in my ability to stand tall and face the world again, and in the new relationships I built, whether with friends, clients, or simply with myself. Looking at the life I had now, I could only smile. I had come so far from where I had been. There was a sense of satisfaction that filled me every day, and it wasn't just about the money I made. It was the life I was living, one that I had worked hard for and built from the ground up. I had learned that wealth wasn't just measured in dollars and cents, but in the richness of your experiences, the lessons you learn along the way, and the people and animals who love you. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly, deeply content. Life had given me second chances, and I was going to make the most of every one of them.